remember when you walk, sometimes you fall. So fall for Jesus, fall for Jesus, fall for Jesus, and live. Sometimes the way is lonely and steep and filled with pain. So if your sky is dark and pours the rain, then cry for Jesus, cry for Jesus, cry for Jesus, and kiss the world goodbye, then go in peace and laugh and glory side, and fly to Jesus, fly to Jesus, fly to Jesus, and live.
Today's scripture lesson is from the book of James, and I'll be reading from chapter 3, verses 13 through verses 18. Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. These are the words of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Let us pray. Creating and loving God, I ask you this day to open your heart to us, and that we would open our hearts to you. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. One of the difficult things about a text like this one is that wisdom is what James is talking about, and wisdom is very difficult to define. It's one of those out there words, you know. It's hard to say, this is wisdom. It's one of those things that you know it when you see it, right? You know, wow, that person showed great wisdom there. But what is James trying to tell us? What is it that he is trying to get across to us? I think it starts with something very simple. If you want to live a life of peace, then you should work for peace. You should strive for peace. You should do things that lead to peace. You should think peaceful thoughts. You should think about ways to be peaceful in situations. But James is not only talking about that. He's talking to us about how to live our lives and how to live in the world that we live in. He's talking about righteousness. And you might remember from last week we talked that righteousness is not always being right. Righteousness is about that relationship that we have with God and that we have with one another. If our goal is to be right all the time, that's not hard to do. But if our goal is to be righteous, to live in a good relationship with God, that's a much more difficult task. We all have our ways of understanding things. We all have things that we're passionate about, that we believe in, and that we think we're right about. But our real goal is to be someone who lives with other people in a good way. There's you all may remember Susie Wiley. Susie Wiley's a Michigan fan, and her husband is wrong. He's an Ohio State fan. Tennessee, Alabama, it's all the same thing, right? We like to be right and wrong, and on those kind of things it really doesn't matter, right? But there's a lot of things that we want to be right and wrong about that we start to get in the way of things. And we need to find ways to live with each other. Live with each other in a way that helps us have relationships. Good business people will tell you, good salespeople will tell you it's not about making the sale, it's about having a relationship. Because they don't just want to make that sale, right? They want to make the next sale. They want you to go have such a good experience buying something that you go and tell somebody else, hey, when you buy this, go buy it from Joe Smith, because Joe Smith sold that to me and I loved him. It's all about relationships. But we live in a world where we like to shout and yell at each other. We like to point blame. We like we know we like this because if we didn't, it wouldn't be the most popular thing on television. News channels don't do news anymore, they do entertainment. They want to do things that get more people watching their news network. And so they do things that get people against each other. And we like to look at other people and say, well, you didn't do it the way I did it, so therefore you're doing it wrong. How many of you remember when you were a young adult being told that your generation was lazy? The fact is, every generation goes through this. I grew up in the 80s, so the adult generation during the 80s was a little bit older than me, and they were all being called lazy, and they weren't being told, they were told they were just all out for themselves. And then when I got to be an adult and got out of college, and then my generation was Generation X, and everybody was saying about Generation X, they were lazy, no account, they didn't have this or that. And then it was the Generation Y, and now it's the millennials, and all I hear about the millennials is, they got to have a trophy for everything. We all got a complaint. But you know who created that world for them? The ones complaining. Right? But my guess is you could go back generations and generations and generations, and somebody's always complaining about the next generation coming up because they didn't do it the way, they didn't have to go through what we did. My mom had to walk 5 miles to school uphill in the snow both ways, right? All that kind of stuff. And she probably did, because I know where she lived, and she did have to go uphill to go to school, and it was snowing a lot because she lived in Pittsburgh. But the fact is, if we spend a lot of time just generalizing about people and questioning them based on their generation or their age or whatever. Or we spend a lot of time trying to say, well, they're on the right and they're on the left. We don't spend any time figuring out who is this person and why does God love them so much. James wants us to understand that if our goal is to seek a relationship with God, then we need to live in a way that is to seek a relationship with God. How many of you remember back in the 90s there was this fad, everybody wore a bracelet or they had a necklace or something that said WWJD. And WWJD meant, what would Jesus do? How many of you knew that that came from a book that was written in the 50s? One person. And you're the reader in the group, aren't you? You're a papal major. That's good. It was from a book written in the 50s, but it became a fad in the 90s. And let me tell you, there's some pitfalls to putting a bracelet on your wrist that says WWJD. What would Jesus do? It's because you've got to be reminded all the time. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And here's the thing. How many of you really know what Jesus would do? And isn't it a bit presumptuous for you to think so? I know that there are times when I'm certain that I know what Jesus would do, and somebody else gives me a different perspective that I hadn't thought of, and maybe I realize Jesus wouldn't have done that in the first place. But if Jesus were in my shoes, but Jesus isn't in your shoes. So, if what would Jesus do isn't enough. But by the way, I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing either. Because it's good for us to stop and think every once in a while that, how would God want me to behave in this situation? How would God want me to act in this thing? But here's what the difference is. James is trying to teach us something more in depth. Like the writer John did as well. John talked about abiding in Christ and Christ abiding in us. And what James is really getting at is that we need to live a life that God is with us in all aspects of our lives. One of the writers that I read, after I read what he wrote here, I said, boy, he's been reading my mind because I've been thinking about this a lot recently. He wrote, the kind of wisdom the Scriptures envision is a way of life that is born of walking humbly with God. It is a way of life that is inspired by the presence of God's Spirit. When you live in such a way that you are consciously aware of God's presence, it tends to create a sense of inner strength. But it is always a strength that manifests itself in gentleness, in humility, in self-sacrifice, in kindness. I think we need to start thinking about how it is we live with God. That if we're in constant contact with God in our lives, if we're always thinking about God and how God would want us to be, and more importantly, is God present in me? When someone comes to me, do they meet Christ? Do they meet the God? Do they meet God that is in me? Am I consistent in every way that I live? In such a way that I know that God's presence is with me? Now, I know that there are times when we're doing things that things happen and we're not so sure about whether God is there. For instance, when you're in that little bit of road rage, is God present with you at that time? Just yesterday, Carla and I were going to see a movie. And we got on the road, what's that road the Hammonds live on? Bethel Road, yeah. We got on Bethel Road and there was a car in front of us and they were going 20 miles an hour all the way down that road. And when you're going 20 miles an hour and there's a curve in the road, what do? You keep driving, right? No, they put their brakes on because that curve, they might be going too fast. So they had to slow down. and then they crested the hill, and they came down the hill and started to speed up. You know, they got all the way to 21, had to put on the brakes. Now, in my younger age, what I might have done was driven right up behind them, right? Made them more nervous. And I don't know that they were nervous. I mean, how do you get nervous going 20 miles an hour? I went faster than a bicycle. But you know, they're driving, enjoying their Saturday evening and looking at the things they've looked at every time they've driven through there every other day. But when I was younger, I might have driven up right behind them to let them know I was there, right? If I was really antsy, I might have flashed my lights at them, right? But what did I do? I backed off. I said, you know, if I get up right under them and make them nervous and all that, all it's really going to do is make them drive 15. And is it really that important that I get to the interstate 30 seconds early? We all have those times when we want to behave in a way that's very earthly. And on our way home, we got on the interstate and we're coming up the hill on the interstate and there's a car in front of us who is accelerating, going faster and faster than we are. And they're going uphill, going faster with their brakes on. Public service announcement here, folks. Don't drive with 2 feet. 1 foot on the gas. Unless you have a clutch, you don't need to be using your left foot. Because when you put that brake on, I can't tell when you are stopping. So somebody down the road is going to be seeing that person stop and they're going to be slamming on their brakes because they didn't know what was going on. They're going to be upset and we go through the whole cycle again. We have to find ways to live in the presence of God so that we know that God is with us all the time. Do we walk humbly with God? If we want to understand that we abide in God and God abides in us, doesn't that bring about humility for us? And James keeps talking about peace and being peaceable, but he also talked on the other side of it. If you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. If we think we're right and we get into an argument with somebody and we try to convince them to our side of whatever it is, and we start to treat them less than we would want them to treat us, we start to treat them in a way differently than we think God would want to treat them, then that is not wisdom from God. That is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. If we have a goal that we could be peaceful, loving people, then we need to be consistent in everything we do to reach that goal. Even the little things. How do you behave when the car in front of you is going too slow? How do you behave in the grocery store when the line is too long? How do you behave when things are difficult in your life? How do you behave when things are good in your life? How do you behave when someone else comes to you? We have to be consistent. If you want to achieve the goal, if you want to live a life with God, then you have to choose to live a life with God. We often talk about giving things up, sacrificing to do it. I've been losing weight. I've lost 35 pounds. Carla's been my inspiration, and we've had to learn some things. One is, don't ever go on a diet if you want to lose weight. Change the way you eat. If I go on a diet, all I'm doing is depriving myself of stuff. I lost 25 pounds once doing that, and I gained 35 back, right? Don't diet. Change your behavior. Choose that you're going to live healthier in the long run. Same is true with our spiritual lives. If you want to grow closer to Christ, don't just sacrifice things in your life. Instead, take on what it takes. Change behavior in your life that will lead to a life with God, with Christ in your heart. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality and hypocrisy. Those are good things to live for. Those are good things to strive for. The result, a harvest of righteousness, a good relationship with God, is sown in peace for those who make peace. James gives us some good advice. Let's live for God. Let us pray. Creating and loving God, help us to be the Christian that you want us to be, the disciple that you want us to be. Help us to grow in your grace. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.